Let us look at the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 6 to 7. Verse 6 says that do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Paul tells us that we should not be anxious about nothing. I want us to focus on the word anxiety. Now, the truth is that there's no way that we can arrive to depression without going through anxiety first. Anxiety ushers us to depression. Now, what happens when you get anxious is that demons are there preaching to you about your insufficiency. Now, the reason God made us insufficient is so that we can find our sufficiency in Him. So now, when the enemy does not want you to pray, he comes to you and then he preaches to you about your insufficiency. What do I mean about insufficiency? Let's say you have to pay rent in January and your money was consumed by school fees and food and everything you did on Christmas. So what happens is that the enemy comes to you, he comes and preaches to you about that. Like, listen, you do not have money to pay rent. So you become anxious. The minute he starts preaching about your insufficiency, you now become anxious that, how am I going to pay rent? God gave us insufficiency so that we can find our sufficiency in Him. Meaning that when you do not have rent, you have to go to God. When you find yourself in a position where you can see your own insufficiency, that is the perfect time to go to God and ask for Him to make you sufficient. You have 5 days to pay rent, and the enemy is right there saying, you're going to sleep on the street. Through the stage of anxiety, you accept defeat before you even fight. All these things are in your mind. You think that you are the one who's thinking, but the enemy is the one who's preaching. Mind you as a Christian, your reality is in the Lord. But the enemy comes to you and tells you that you do not have money for rent. But according to God, you have the money for rent. You're just not having it on your hand. The enemy preaches to you. You give in to his tactics. And then you say, you know what? I do not have money for rent. And then you accept defeat before you even fight. That ushers in depression. And depression is a state where you cannot exercise your spiritual freedom. You are at a point where you cannot pay rent, right? You have let anxiety defeat you. Now you are at a state of depression. You cannot even pray to God and say, God, I do not have money for rent. Can you please provide? That's where the enemy comes and say, there's a loan shark that side, there's a loan shark that side. So you forget the fact that you have the privilege to make your requests known to God, and then you go to a loan shark because of you have been defeated at the state of anxiety. And you are defeated because of you did not even start fighting back against the enemy. Each and everyone who killed him or herself, anxiety came through, and they were defeated in anxiety first. And they agreed with the enemy, and then they could not exercise their spiritual freedom. When you go to verse 7 of the same book, it tells us that, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind. Now you have the mind, which consumes all this information. You have the heart, which accepts the information that comes from the mind. The mind tells the heart that, I'm processing this information that we do not have money to pay rent. And the heart says, and we cannot. And then there's an agreement. The mind says, I don't think we'll ever get through this situation. The heart says, you are right. That's the state of defeat. Making things known to God. The minute I make things known to God, the verse does not say that God will take my troubles away, but it says that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard my heart and my mind, meaning that it will barricade my mind from all the demons that are trying to preach to me about my insufficiency.